Excuse me, it's not changing the colors of the Air Guard. It would be King's Guard. My apologies. Now, although it has been restored to resemble the personal aircraft of the Prince of Wales and then picking up the Ace of England, this particular example of the de Havilland Dragon Rapide was manufactured by the de Havilland Company in 1944 and used by the British government during the Second World War before being sold in a dilapidated state in 1946 to Charles Kalendi and his brother-in-law, Mr. Bill Lyle, who then were attempting to start their own small airline. First to come back around is the Fiesler Stork. This German, well, its role was essentially the same as that of the L-5 Stinson, forward air control, aerial reconnaissance, that sort of thing, but intended for support of ground troops. But its most famous accomplishments came near the end of the war, and specifically in an action precipitated by the negotiation of a separate peace by Italy. Following the invasion of Italy by Allied forces, the Italian peninsula began to collapse at the front, and the Germans insisted on keeping the soft underbelly of Europe stable, literally invaded Italy and usurped it from Italian control. They were not able to hold the entire peninsula, and with about 30 to 50% of the peninsula being held by Allied forces, the Italian fascist government made a separate peace and actually overthrew Benito Mussolini. He was then put under house arrest in an Italian Alpine redoubt without any hope of rescue. Hitler, observing a somewhat overdeveloped sense of loyalty to Mussolini, decided that he must rescue his friend, whereupon he commissioned a commando raid with the use of the Fiesler Stork. De Havilland Dragon Rapide today being piloted by Mr. Gerald Yeagan. Making a nice pass over the field. We followed again by the Fiesler Stork. The commando raid conducted for the rescue of Benito Mussolini was commanded by Otto Skorzeny. The long landing gear of the Fiesler Stork lends it its name, Stork, Storch, or literally stork, the flying bird. The landing gear is filled with struts that allow for hard landings in short spaces. Our particular example has a somewhat misty past, but it's believed to have been among a number of pieces given over to the French following the conclusion of the Second World War as revolutionary. The de Havilland Tiger Moth is a further development of a plane, an earlier type known as the Gypsy Moth. The first Tiger Moths were delivered by de Havilland in 1932, and only 1,000 or so had been manufactured by the beginning of World War II in 1939. By the time the war ended, there were some 4,200 in service. The total number actually manufactured in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom eventually rose to 8,500, and many of them went on to serve in other countries, including South Africa, what was then known as Rhodesia, India, as well, and all employed for the purpose of training pilots. Most of these planes were constructed of a mixture of wooden and metal components. Some were made entirely of wood, but all of them employed fabric covering. The Aviation Museum of Tiger Moth itself was built in 1940 by the Morris Motor Car Company, the company that brought us the Morris Minor, and more familiarly perhaps the Mini Cooper. This is not unusual. Manufacturing in the United Kingdom, as elsewhere during the Second World War, was turned over to the production of material for the war. The same was done in the United States with companies like General Motors and Ford giving over their equipment for the use of production of aircraft. In fact, I think Ford holds the record for the manufacture of the greatest number of planes, and that happens to have been the B-29. itself the development of earlier planes and was later further developed into a 4-engine type. The Rapide itself came from large single-engine light transports that were developed by the de Havilland Company in the 1930s. As I said before, the museum's de Havilland Dragon Rapide was built in 1944 and was actually known as the de Havilland Dominique and employed as a light transport and also for radio navigation training. About 734 of these were produced, and many took the DC-3 and or C-47 entered into commercial service following the end of hostilities in 1945. As I said earlier, the de Havilland Chipmunk itself came as a replacement for the very successful de Havilland Tiger Moth. The first Chipmunk actually flew in 1946, and it's interesting that today we have on hand the Canadian Avro Lancaster. This particular aircraft was actually developed by de Havilland of Canada. Two different types were developed, the original for Canadian service and then the British version itself, which was fully equipped for aerobatic service, providing for a greater range of training that could be demonstrated by this plane for its young pilots. There was also a slight difference in the configuration of the cockpit between these two aircraft. The Chipmunk became so well accepted in such a short span of time that orders were almost immediately filled by Egypt, Chile, Thailand, and Portugal, which itself negotiated a license and eventually went on to manufacture 60 de Havilland Chipmunks within their own borders. Across the world, Chipmunks remained in military service in much the same way as the SNJ or T6 as late as 1996, and today many of them are still privately owned. If you admire the fine paintwork and restoration work conducted on the de Havilland Dragon Rapide, you may find it to be roughly reminiscent of the royal wedding which was held just a few weeks ago. The fighter factory's own Chipmunk was built in 1942, and the aircraft type actually has the distinction of having been the very first plane in which His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, consort of Queen Elizabeth II of England, received his first flight lesson in 1952. As I said, the long legs of the landing gear of the Fiesler Stork contain oil and spring shock absorbers that can compress as much as 18 inches to allow for the plane to set down almost anywhere in such a very short area. And it was limited and rough airfields, and you can see there the landing gear compressing with the landing of the Fiesler Stork on our field. Don Anklin, the pilot. This plane was flown effectively by the great German test pilot Hanna Reich in the middle of the Battle of Berlin. In fact, she flew out of the besieged city under heavy fire from Soviet forces and did this from the badly damaged roadway just in front of the Brandenburg Gate in downtown Berlin. So again, the Fiesler Stork, long-legged, but short on takeoff. So a round of applause, please, for Don Anklin, who's come in for a landing just now, to be followed in the de Havilland Tiger Moth by Mr. Ray Scott. Let's give him a round of applause, too, as he draws near. Again, he more able to hear than most with his open cockpit. And scooting alongside the de Havilland Chipmunk, the plucky Chipmunk replacement for the de Havilland Tiger Moth, Robert Powell, our pilot, this afternoon. Mr. Scott taking his time, rolling the Tiger Moth for effect. So again, a round of applause, please, for our pilots this afternoon at the Aviation Museum. And now coming in on final approach with Gerald Yegan at the controls, the Royal de Havilland Dragon Rapide, again constructed in 1944, but restored to resemble the personal aircraft of His Royal Highness, Prince of Wales, and King Edward VIII of England. It looks so gorgeous in flight, it looks almost good on the ground. I find it to be one of the finest expressions of Art Deco in flight. So one more round of applause, please, for Mr. Gerald Yeagans, our pilot this afternoon for the de Havilland Dragon Rapide, and Mr. Yeagan will return later this afternoon to fly our P-51 Mustang Double Trouble 2. For those of you nearest the concrete apron in front of our main hangars, I'm sure that you have noticed several of our Navy aircraft spinning up in preparation for their flight demonstrations this afternoon, and they will soon take to the skies. You may wish to observe the mechanical ballet of the unfolding of their wings, rolling first, I think, from my vantage point, it looks to me like the Corsair is coming forward today, being piloted by Obie O'Brien, who has the distinction of being one of the few, if not the only pilot to have flown the Corsair in combat and still flying the flight to this day. Obie flew the Corsair on the Korean Peninsula during the Korean War. So the Corsair now taxiing from the concrete apron as the Tiger Moth and the de Havilland Dragon Rapide return to their positions on the flight. And again, I would encourage you to observe the unfolding of the wings of the Corsair as she prepares for her flight this afternoon. Our next flight intended to feature aircraft employed by the United States Navy during the Second World War.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. This is how a field interrogation would work within the confines after someone was shot down. Later on, they would be taken
for more efficient stowage aboard aircraft carriers.
Luftwaffe always treated their prisoners well as they treated us. I'd like to introduce some of the Army Air Corps guys. Come on out. We do this every year with them. This is a wet Will Snyder. Your name is this is the possibility of a good survive. He survived. Barely. We'd also like to thank the members of the Possum Jägers and the Bird Jägers. My adjutant here, Major. So if you would give them a round of applause. One more. A late comer, but a very necessary part, because she would be taking notes on everything that was said and done. She filled in at the last minute. Please give her a round of applause. Hey!